I don't talk about this topic much, but maybe I should, because it's vitally important. When saving in precious metals, there are many, and I mean many, choices available as to how to store them. Each of these choices comes with advantages and disadvantages, protections and risks. And it's worth knowing about these because as you accumulate more and more metal, sticking with a single storage location alternative can result in taking on some very high risks. It's important to diversify when it comes to storing precious metals, and thinking through how to go about becoming diversified early in your accumulation journey can help you to avoid big risks and big hassles later. When I think of different ways to store precious metals, I categorize them into 4 different buckets. I'm going to go through each one of these categories and talk about some of the pluses and minuses of each one. First, there's self-storage. This category is very popular with those who don't want to accept any counterparty risk. The common phrase that you'll hear is, if you don't hold it, you don't own it. And there are many options for self-storage. Let's talk about them. The one I think most people are familiar with is the use of a home safe. The obvious advantage of this method is that there is absolutely no counterparty risk. Only those who know about the location of the safe, who have access to it, and who have the combination or keys will be able to access the precious metals stored inside. And obviously, as the owner of the safe, you have full access. If you would like to pull out the coins to sell them, to show them to someone, or simply to enjoy them by yourself, you can do that whenever you like. Privacy is a big advantage. Any coins or bars that you store in your safe is wealth that nobody else needs to know about. And this can be a very big advantage when it comes to asset protection. If you store a significant amount of precious metals in the home, I would definitely recommend not telling anyone about it. The main reason is theft, which is the first disadvantage on my list. If it is well known that you have significant portable wealth inside your house, it raises the possibility that your home will be burglarized. Some thieves may even resort to violence to force you to open your safe, provided that they know you have one. So my suggestion is to keep a low profile when it comes to your precious metals. Don't tell anyone about them. If you have a safe, you should also keep it out of sight. Anyone visiting your home, whether it's friends, relatives, guests, or someone you hire to do some work, for example, might see a safe and will immediately wonder what might be inside of it. So the mere presence of a safe is a clue that you have wealth. Keep the safe out of sight. A wall safe with a picture in front of it or a floor safe covered by a rug is a good way to go. But if you go that route, make sure that your safe is a good one. Make sure it's fireproof and waterproof. Of course, what I mean by fireproof and waterproof is that they are guaranteed to withstand several hours of 1400 degree Fahrenheit temperatures and submersion in water. Now, why do I care about water? Well, it's because you'll want to keep your receipts for your metal locked up too. Don't lose them. There may come a time when laws get passed to prevent people from selling precious metals without proof that they purchased them, or new regulations requiring coin dealers to send records of sale to taxing authorities. You'll want to have proof of purchase that shows what you paid. There's another risk of fire that few people think about. If your house burns down, your safe will be laying there amongst the rubble. It will no longer be possible to keep the fact that you have a safe private. And then, assuming that you are the first one to open it, you'll have to figure out what to do with all of that metal. Where are you going to put it? Now, the next disadvantage of keeping metals in a home safe is that of lifestyle flexibility. I don't know about you, but I personally wouldn't feel comfortable leaving the house on vacation or on business travel if it meant leaving a large amount of my wealth unattended. Keeping a lot of metal in a home safe means either asking a trusted friend or relative to house sit, or always having the nagging worry in the back of your head that someone could steal your life savings. And that's not the kind of worry that you really want to deal with while on a vacation. Additionally, you'll have to think about what your next move will look like. Few people live in a house for decades until they die. When the time comes to move, you will have to plan for the safe transport of your metals from your house that you're selling to the house that you're buying. You also need to arrange for moving a potentially very heavy and bulky safe. Do you want the movers to know that you have a large safe? I personally wouldn't feel comfortable doing that. And then one needs to consider how to deal with a situation where you forget the combination or lose the keys. Obviously, you don't want to write down the safe combination in a location where others can find it, so you'll want to be sure that you remember both the safe combination as well as where you backed up the safe combination. And finally, there's the drawback of how to pass along your wealth to beneficiaries. If you want to hand down your wealth, you're going to want to give instructions to those who will be inheriting it. And this can be an advantage from the standpoint of avoiding probate, but it will also mean telling people about what you're storing and where you're storing it. And that could be a problem for sure. Burying your metals in the dirt, euphemistically referred to as midnight gardening, is another mode of self-storage. It's more trouble than storing metals in a home safe, but it can also be more discreet. Now, just like home storage, burying metals offers the benefit of no counterparty risk and also privacy. But unlike home storage, there is limited accessibility because you don't want anyone to know that you have a bunch of metal buried all over your property. When retrieving metal, you may need to dig at night, hence the term midnight gardening, or alternatively create a good reason for doing the digging. Keeping an unplanted bush next to you can create such a reason. There's still the problem of theft. Anyone who knows where you placed your precious metals, or anyone who has a metal detector, may be able to find them and do a little midnight gardening of their own. You may not even know that your metals are gone until you go to look for them. And violent theft is also a possibility. If someone knows that you have metals buried on your property, they may threaten violence against you or a loved one to inspire you to divulge the location of your metals. One way to ensure that your entire hoard is safe is to bury a few sacrificial coins. That way you can satisfy the thief without necessarily giving everything to them. There is the problem of lifestyle flexibility still, though taking a vacation or business trip may be a little less unsettling. Moving is still going to present the same challenge as in-home storage, maybe even a larger challenge. And then, what if you forget where you buried your metal? That would certainly be a problem. You'll want to make a good map, and keep it private, of course. Private, that is, except for your beneficiaries. You want them to know where you buried your metal. How about storing metal in a safe deposit box? I know some people that do that. Why would I consider this to be self-storage? Well, it's because storing your metals in a safe deposit box is not entering into a bailment agreement. The bank is in no way going to guarantee that a certain inventory of precious metal will remain in the box. In fact, I'm pretty sure that most, if not all, banks discourage individuals from storing cash and precious metals in a safe deposit box. As far as advantages go, there's no counterparty risk. The metal will be accessible to you during bank hours, though you may need to make an appointment. If there's a declared bank holiday, good luck. Maybe it will offer some privacy, but as we learned in the 1930s, the government can institute a requirement that an IRS agent be present when a safe deposit box is opened. Theft is still an issue, though maybe less of one. I've heard of cases where individuals reported missing items when they opened safe deposit boxes, though I can't substantiate those claims. Oh, I almost forgot to discuss the note that I placed at the bottom of these slides. If you take personal possession of precious metals, it's going to reduce liquidity, and this is a disadvantage. There is always a significant premium on physical gold and silver products when you buy and sell them, and this spread can be on the order of a few percent for gold and well over 10% for silver. The spread will depend upon the product that you buy and sell. If you're going to hold the metal forever, the spread makes a much smaller difference than if you're going to buy and sell regularly. For example, you may be using gold or silver as your personal emergency fund or savings fund. If you need to dip into it every year or two, these spreads can add up. And if you're going to try to trade the gold to silver ratio, for example, and you're honest with yourself about the costs, I think you'll find that the spread will make trading the gold to silver ratio unprofitable. At least that's the conclusion that I came to long ago. On to the next category, metals lending. Now this is one that I do myself. It's too complicated to include details in this video. Maybe I'll do one in the future. This is a way to not only have your metal wealth professionally stored, but also a way to get paid interest for lending it to an end user. The end user promises the return of your metal at the end of a lease period plus some interest. And this exercise requires a lot of due diligence and a strong contract. There is certainly counterparty risk involved. Obviously, there is a loss of liquidity when the metal is lent out, but it is one category of how to store metal wealth, so I decided to include some mention of it in this video. And the next category up is indirect ownership. I'll start with ownership of mining stock because it will probably be the least controversial of the options that I will discuss in this category. Ownership of mining stock is certainly convenient if you have a brokerage account. All you need to do is put in a buy order, and once it's filled, you can sit back and relax. You don't have to worry about thieves coming to your house and demand that you open your safe. With mining stock, you do have some counterparty risk. It's possible that something may happen at the brokerage that will compromise your shares. Reputable brokerages, at least those in the US, carry SIPC insurance. This insurance won't protect you if the price of your shares drop, but it will cover you in the event that the brokerage goes bust. The insurance makes sure that you maintain ownership of your shares, really nothing else. Mining stocks may also pay dividends, so you may actually receive cash payments as you hold your metal indirectly. Just be aware that metal in the ground is a depleting asset, so the dividends that you receive may simply be a taxable return of capital as opposed to a profit from business activity. Now, it's fairly straightforward to designate beneficiaries in either a will or in a beneficiary form with your brokerage, depending upon the type of account that you hold your shares in. Though the reason it's easy to designate beneficiaries leads me to the first disadvantage. Share ownership is not private. Your ownership will be part of the public record, and that makes it discoverable. You won't be prey to the type of burglar that breaks into your house, but you may fall victim to a frivolous lawsuit. But the big disadvantage is that ownership of shares in a mining company is not a proxy for metal ownership. I've said it many times before. Mining stock and the metals that they produce are not the same thing. The price of your shares will certainly benefit from increases in the price of the product, but there are many other factors that will impact price. These factors include fuel costs, taxes, interest rates, poor management decisions, nationalization, and other factors. Those who insist that mining stocks are a leveraged play on metal are mistaken in my opinion. Now, all of the factors that I just mentioned lead me to the next disadvantage. When you own shares in any corporation, you need to continuously do homework. Is the company being run well? Are they top grading? Are the governments in the jurisdictions that they operate starting to show signs of seizing assets? Are they managing to replace the ounces that they are producing? Are they paying their executives far too much? Are they taking on debt that could force them into bankruptcy? These are all things that you're going to want to stay on top of if you own mining shares. It's certainly more work than simply storing some ounces somewhere. And then there's the risk of fraud. Even if you pore over every quarterly report and disseminate all of the footnotes, can you be sure that you've not invested in the next Bre-X? If you're too young to remember the Bre-X scandal, it's worth looking that one up and studying it. It's fascinating. Now, unlike gold and silver, mining companies can and do go bankrupt from time to time. When that happens, it's the debt owners who have the first claim on the assets of the mining company, which includes the gold and silver that they have in the ground. Finally, I need to state that there is no access to the metals. I think this is pretty obvious to most. In only rare occasions do mining companies pay dividends in metal. The only thing that you are entitled to as an owner of a mining company is a share of the dividends that they pay out, the right to vote, and the right to sell your shares to others. That's it. You can't demand any metal. All right, enough about mining company ownership. Let's move on to the next option in this category, which is futures. A futures contract is a claim on metal. So as long as the contract performs, more on that later, the contract can be viewed as the equivalent of stored gold or silver. I'm going to list convenience as an advantage here, but with a caveat. While it's more convenient than storing metals directly, it does take some care when transacting in the futures market. Use of the futures market is not something that I'd recommend to a novice. This is the playground of those who are skilled and knowledgeable. Now, just like with mining stock, beneficiaries can be named, but again, this is because the assets are part of the public record, which leads me to the disadvantage list. Futures are not private. When you own contracts, they become part of the discoverable public record. Now, there is counterparty risk when dealing with futures, and this could be significant. Remember, the person on the other side of the contract could be highly leveraged. Clearinghouses have rules in place to help ensure that leveraged counterparties can fulfill their obligations. Futures are marked to market, And if the price goes the wrong way, your counterparty may be required to post more margin fairly quickly or risk having his or her position liquidated. Now, that's not the only counterparty risk that you may face, though. There's also the risk that an agent that you work through may engage in fraudulent activity. All one has to do to realize why this is the case is to look up Bernie Madoff. Now, the next big disadvantage of futures contracts is that of contract size. The standard gold futures contract size is 100 or 400 ounces, and the standard silver contract size is 5,000 ounces, though there are many contracts available for 33 ounces of gold and 1,000 ounces of silver. Even the small contracts, though, are inconveniently large for most investors. This, unfortunately, is one of the reasons why investors in gold and silver futures contracts may be tempted to buy on margin, meaning only posting a portion of the cash needed to pay for an entire contract. Of course, greed is another reason why many buyers of futures use margin. Don't do it, folks. I'll tell you a personal story. Decades ago, when I started buying precious metals, one of the firms that I bought from was Monex. The sales representative that I was assigned kept pushing me to try out a product that they had, which was called the Atlas account. It was essentially an account that you could use to leverage your metals position. I forget right now what the maximum leverage was, but it was quite high. The sales rep kept telling me that if I really thought that the price of metals would climb, the Atlas account would be the right product for me. And I kept turning him down. I just wasn't comfortable with the risk. In hindsight, I made the right decision. Although gold is now a factor of 6 higher in price than it was back then, and silver is higher by a factor of 4, I wouldn't have realized those gains had I used significant leverage. The volatility of the metals price would have resulted in my position being liquidated at some point along the way. The key message that I'd like to give everyone is this: don't use leverage. When you lose, you can lose big. You can lose your entire position. When you simply own gold or silver, you can't lose everything. Owning an asset free and clear means that you are in 100% control. And control is worth a lot more money than people realize. On to the next disadvantage. Precious metals almost always trade in contango, and contango means that the price of the future is higher than the spot price. There's a very good reason for this. If the future price was lower than the spot price, then all someone would need to do is sell their metal at spot, buy the future, and wait for the future contract to mature for a risk-free guaranteed profit. The reason why this situation doesn't occur is that there is a lot, and I mean a lot, of precious metal that would take advantage of this situation. The only time that it may occur is if those who have large positions question the ability of the futures market to perform. If you ever see gold or silver go into backwardation, it's a bad sign. It means that confidence is lacking in the futures market. Anyway, back to contango. So the price of the futures contract will be higher than spot. This means if you choose to own gold or silver through the futures market, there will always be a cost drag. You will be buying higher than spot, holding the contract to close to expiry, and then selling it for cash that you can roll into a new futures contract. And each time you roll your contract, you'll be paying the spread between near-term prices and the futures price. And this will gradually eat away at your wealth. Now, speaking of rolling over, another disadvantage of futures is that it represents an obligation on the part of both parties. The buyer of the futures contract has the obligation to take delivery if the seller of the futures wants to deliver metal. The seller has the obligation to deliver the buyer the metal if the buyer wants to take delivery. Now, most contracts are settled for cash as opposed to physical delivery, but that does not alleviate the risk. The easiest way to avoid having to take delivery is to sell the futures contract prior to the notice dates, though doing this also increases your cost. Each time you buy and sell a future, you'll be paying the spread between the bid and the ask. Let's now turn our attention to ETFs. Now, ETFs are a fairly controversial subject in the precious metals community, and maybe for good reason. I don't personally use them, but I'll include them here in the discussion because they are an option for those who want exposure to at least the price of the precious metal. The main benefit of an ETF is that it will closely track the price of the precious metal that you're interested in having exposure to. Now, let me talk briefly about how this tracking works. The ETFs are a vehicle that hold metal on the exchanges in approved vaults. Now, I've heard claims that the metal may not actually be there, but I happen to believe that it is. The owners of the ETFs, or at least the large ones, simply have too large of a vested interest not to be very careful about this, and as a result, auditing is done regularly. Anyway, large investors known as authorized participants have special privileges. They can provide metal to the ETF in exchange for freshly created shares, and they can also tender their shares in return for direct ownership of the metal. This creates an arbitrage opportunity if the price deviates from the market price of the metal. If the price of the metal is higher than the price of the ETF shares, then the authorized participants will tender their shares and take possession of the metal. If the price of the metal is lower than the price of the ETF shares, then the authorized participants will buy metal on the exchanges, deliver to the ETF, and take delivery of the shares. It's a mechanism that provides a profit motive for the authorized participants, but it also results in the shares tracking the price of the metal very, very closely. Now, as with the other means of indirect ownership, it's pretty convenient. Shares of ETFs are easy to obtain, and as easy to obtain as those of mining stocks. Of course, with ETFs, you don't have to do as much homework. ETFs are very low cost, and they're ways to gain exposure to the price of the metal. For example, the Spider Gold mini shares have an expense ratio of only 0.1%, which is the lowest expense ratio that I've seen among the ETFs. The Granite Shares Gold Trust has an expense ratio of 0.17%. The iShares Gold Trust has an expense ratio of 0.25%. Now, these are all very low, but before you rush out to buy, you should know that you're not actually buying gold or silver. You're basically buying a product that gives you only exposure to the gold price. Unless you're an authorized participant, you won't be able to take physical delivery. Now, as with other paper products, designating beneficiaries is straightforward. But again, one of the reasons for this is that this asset's not private. It will show up on an asset search that someone does on you. I already mentioned the fact that unless you're an authorized participant, you'll have no access to the metal. But if you are one of those individuals who can withdraw metal, you'll need to give them notice. So that places some limitation on your accessibility. Now, counterparty risk is an obvious disadvantage when it comes to ETFs. You do need to trust the custodian of the product that you buy that the metal is there. And this is where audit reports come in handy. If you own an ETF product, you should review them regularly. Now, I don't know of any way to completely eliminate counterparty risk when it comes to the ETFs. But then again, there's a risk in just about anything that you decide to use to store your wealth. So just be aware of the risks that you take and try to spread them around so that your overall risk doesn't grow too large. Now finally, there's that dependence upon arbitrage. Remember how I said that the price of the ETF tracks the metal price closely? Well, what would happen if the authorized participants all decided that they no longer had an interest in holding shares of the ETF? They'd turn in their shares, take delivery of the metal, and the ETF price would plummet. It would be very similar to a bank run. Now, not having the right to take delivery of your metal means that you wouldn't be able to even get in line for that bank run. Now, I don't like that risk personally, which is why I don't own any ETFs. Okay, on to the next category, custodial storage. By custodial storage, I mean a professional service that's paid a regular negotiated fee for the safekeeping of your precious metals. There are many providers of vaulting storage. I'll talk about the one that I personally use in a minute and why I've chosen them. But for now, let me discuss the two main types of custodial storage, segregated and unsegregated. The main difference between the two is that in a segregated account, your precious metal is kept completely separate from that of other clients. Legal title is not transferred. The vaulting service has no rights to use your metal in any other way than is specified in the custody agreement. In a segregated account, the custodian also agrees to maintain your metal in the form in which it is deposited. If you store gold eagles, for example, you'll get gold eagles back when you request them. With a non-segregated account, the service pools the metal together, often in a homogeneous form such as good delivery gold bars. Specific quantities of metal are assigned to individual account holders. If the individuals who hold the gold retain title to a certain quantity of metal, then this arrangement is referred to as allocated storage. Let's talk about the pros and cons of segregated storage. Compared to storing the metal yourself, the arrangement is certainly more convenient, though it can be less convenient than some of the other ways of storing metal. Now, as an asset on record, it's possible to designate beneficiaries. As I mentioned, You can gain access to the same metals that you placed into custody. Doing so is going to be less convenient than storing them yourself, though. You'll need to provide notice to the custodian, arrange for shipping, and pay for shipping costs. In addition to the shipping cost, it will also take some time. Now, as far as privacy goes, I'd place it somewhere in between self-storage and indirect ownership. When you have a contract with a vaulting service, someone who tries really hard can discover this, but it's not going to be immediately obvious to an outsider what you have stored there. I think most searches focus mainly on bank accounts, brokerage accounts, and real estate title. So as far as privacy goes, I think this is pretty good. In terms of disadvantages, segregated storage can be higher cost than other options. The reason why this is so is pretty clear. The vaulting service will have to allocate more space for your metal, and will have to go through more trouble in their auditing process. You'll be paying at least 0.5% per year of the assessed value of your precious metals to store them in a segregated account, plus maybe some fixed monthly fees. This cost might be well worth it, though, for peace of mind. Now, because you're dealing with segregated metal, liquidity is going to be somewhat of an issue, especially if you're storing coins or small bars. You're still going to have to deal with the bid and ask spread on whatever product you choose to store. But if the vaulting service is not affiliated with a precious metals retailer, then you'll also end up paying shipping costs in order to sell and buy metal, and these costs can add up. Fraud is another possibility. The best way to mitigate the potential consequences of fraud are to go with a highly reputable vaulting service, and also one that can demonstrate to you that they're fully insured. Now let's discuss unsegregated storage, starting with the advantages. Two of the biggest advantages, especially if you choose a vaulting service that's affiliated with a retailer, are convenience and liquidity. Now, if you do this, you can buy and sell your ownership of the metal with the click of a button. The service that I use, that I will talk about in a moment, even lets you buy gold and silver during evenings and weekends. Spreads can be quite low when transacting in an unsegregated account. The reason for this is that the vault will typically own good delivery bars. Transaction costs can be very small compared to the purchase of retail coins and bars. Utilizing an unsegregated account also means storage costs can be kept quite low. And when I say quite low, what I mean is comparable or even lower than the ETF products. Beneficiaries can be named, but again, privacy can be pretty good, despite the fact that the assets could be on record. Holding metal in an unsegregated pool with a vaulting service is less discoverable than having a bank account or owning shares. The wealth is probably more easily discoverable than with a segregated account, but someone really has to know where to look to know that you have an account of this type. Okay, now on to the disadvantages. Just like with a segregated account, there's always the risk of fraud or bankruptcy. So make sure you go with a very reputable vaulting service and make sure that they're fully insured. Access to metals may be inconvenient. When you own metal in an unsegregated account, you essentially own fractions of good delivery bars. This is generally not a problem if the vaulting service is affiliated with a retailer. If so, you can arrange to sell your stake of ownership in the pool, have your credit applied to the purchase of a retail product, and then pay the shipping and have your product delivered to you. The important thing to note is that while this may be inconvenient, it is possible. This is not the case with an ETF or a share of a mining stock. With some vaulting services, access to the real metal may be easier than others, and this is where careful research is appropriate. Okay, I've gone through a lot of categories and options. I mentioned that I was going to discuss the vaulting service that I personally use and why I chose them. Before I do, I'd like to say a couple of things. First, I've had my YouTube channel since 2013. For the first 7 years of that, I didn't even enable advertising because I didn't want the ads to compromise my message. I only turned them on a couple of years ago because I realized that most of the revenue likely comes from a share of the YouTube Premium subscription fees, and the rest of it will come from sources where it's obvious to identify that it's a commercial. I never accepted an offer to affiliate myself with a product that I didn't personally use and believe in. But recently, I was approached by OneGold, which is a joint venture between APMEX and Sprott, and they asked me if I'd like to become an affiliate. Now, because I use their service and I really like it, I said yes. So you should be fully aware of that before watching further. Now, if you're unfamiliar with them, I do recommend watching further because it really is a nice service. I fully endorse OneGold. If I didn't, I wouldn't use it. But that doesn't mean that it's right for you. You should carefully consider all of your options and the ones that I discussed before choosing any of them. It's your wealth. Your circumstances are unique. Only you know what's right for you. Don't ever let anyone else take the responsibility for what you do with your wealth. OneGold is an option for unsegregated storage. I should clarify what I mean by this because if you visit the OneGold website, it will clearly show that the metal is segregated. And there's a reason for this. The vaults themselves segregate the OneGold customer metal from all other metal. However, each individual OneGold customer's metal is stored with the metal of every other OneGold customer. So it's kind of commingled if you're a customer, but it's segregated if you're OneGold. But the metal is fully allocated, meaning that the metal does not show up on the balance sheet of OneGold. It is not the property of OneGold and therefore not subject to the claims of OneGold creditors. It is fully the property of the OneGold customers. As I mentioned, OneGold is a partnership between APMEX and Sprott, two very well-known names in the precious metals community. OneGold was formed in 2018. Because the vaulting service is affiliated with precious metals retailers, it makes purchases, sales, and storage very easy. For example, there are 4 vaulting options open: US, Switzerland, Canada, and the UK. All 4 will allow a person to buy and store gold and silver. The one in the US allows for purchasing and storing of platinum as well. All the vaults are operated either by Loomis, CNT, or APMEX, except for Canada, which is operated by the Royal Canadian Mint. Audits are frequently conducted. One thing to note is that with the Canada option, the metal is actually the working stock of the Royal Canadian Mint, so it's not the same as the storage in the other locations. I've been able to make purchases very quickly, just as quickly as if I were buying stock in my brokerage account. All I need to do is open up the OneGold phone app or their website in a browser, click on one of these products, and enter how much I would like to buy and sell. My bank account is linked, and so the cash is credited or debited electronically. I like the option to choose where my metals are being stored. Offering multiple international vaults allows for the option of international diversification of storage, which I think is a good idea. The liquidity of these products is really quite good. I'm showing the US options here to make sure that I can show you the spread on platinum, which is not available for other options. But the spreads are the same regardless of location. You can see here that the premium for purchasing gold is 0.8%, the premium for silver is 2%, and the premium for platinum is 3.7%. And these really are quite good premiums when you compare them to the retail options. This is one of the benefits of going with an unsegregated approach. The economy of scale that it offers allows premiums to be kept very low. It's a definite advantage if you think that you'll be buying and selling reasonably frequently. But even if you don't, it means that you'll be getting more metal for your cash each time you purchase. Storage costs are among the lowest that I've seen from vaulting services. It's 0.12% per year for gold, 0.3% for silver, and 0.3% for platinum. This is comparable to, and even a little bit better than the ETF products. This is again an advantage of not segregating the metal. As far as possible fraud or bankruptcy goes, as I mentioned, the metal is allocated, meaning it does not show up on OneGold's balance sheet. It's exempt from the claims of OneGold creditors. In addition, OneGold fully insures its inventory with Lloyd's of London. Now, OneGold also regularly posts its inventory reports, so you can peruse the listing of all of the 400-ounce gold and 1,000-ounce silver bars if you like. The inventory of each vault is audited twice per year by an independent accounting firm. Plus, OneGold does have parent companies, Sprott and APMEX, which, as I said, are very reputable in the precious metals community. Now, OneGold, because of their parent company, APMEX, has resolved the issue of access to metals too. If a person has metals stored in any OneGold option, they can liquidate a portion of that holding to purchase any one of the retail products that APMEX sells. Of course, One would have to pay for the retail premium and also the shipping, but it makes it possible for someone who wants to redeem their metal to do so. There are probably some other benefits of OneGold that I should mention that may be of interest to some people. For example, purchases are not subject to sales tax. This is going to be quite beneficial to those living in states that impose high sales taxes. A further benefit is that OneGold allows a person to buy metal in amounts that match the amount of cash that they have available. This is an obvious advantage for someone who wants to buy, for example, gold coins, and doesn't have enough to buy a full ounce every month. There are lower weight gold coins available, but usually for a much higher premium. Being able to buy fractions of an ounce at a 0.8% premium regardless of amount is a very attractive option compared to having to save up enough cash until you're able to buy a full ounce coin that's still going to be 5 or 6% over spot. Okay, time to wrap this video up. I hope you found this presentation to be informative. I especially hope that it will help those who are new to the purchase and storage of precious metals to evaluate your options. I also hope that you decide to check out OneGold. I found it to be one of the more attractive options out there, and I think you will too. But again, don't let anyone else assume responsibility for how you handle your wealth. You worked hard for it. You owe it to yourself to make the decisions that are best for you. Please be sure to evaluate your options and that you're comfortable with the ones that you choose.